As a rising churchman and academic, canon theologian and longtime member of the Anglican Synod, Dr. Gavin Ashenden was appointed a chaplain to Queen Elizabeth II.
You get to go to garden parties at Buckingham Palace, you get to go to receptions at Windsor.
But Ashenden started to question the direction the Anglican Church was going in. He was shocked by what he believed was its departure from historic Christian teachings.
Every church has an altar or a stage. And it's either a sacrifice or it's a show. It's either the mass or it's entertainment.
And when looking for theological answers to his questions about the Anglican Church, he found the responses unconvincing.
Each of them will say, well, I've prayed about this and here's my answer. And of course, if they play the spiritual card, who is to say, no, I think you're shallow? You can't say that to somebody. And so you can't call the bluff ever.
He started to speak out publicly about his concerns for the Church, and then got a call from the Lord Chamberlain.
The general public are under the impression that when you speak on behalf of the Queen. And the difficulty I have is that you might be. And the other problem is the general public are under the impression that the Queen is influenced by your views. And the reason that's a problem is she might be.
You either shut up
or resign.
Or you resign.
Yes.
And then his own faith journey took a dramatic turn, from Anglican bishop to Catholic convert.
In fact, the Catholic Church does have profound theological answers to all these questions because it's been asking them for a very long time.
But that decision came at a cost.
You do lose your friends, you lose a whole culture. There are clubs, societies, so yes, you give up a lot.
Do you ever feel a little sense of betrayal on a human level? I'm Colm Flynn in Canterbury in the United Kingdom, and this is an interview with Dr. Gavin Ashenden. Dr. Gavin Ashenden, it's great to meet you. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
I love it when I called you to set up this interview, and you didn't know me from Adam, and I said, Gavin, it's great to talk to you. My name is Colm Flynn from EWTN. How are you doing? And you said, remarkably well. I said, and then I told you I had a friend in New York, Clive Anderson. Whenever I call him, I say, Clive, how are you doing? He says, I'm living the dream. And you told me about a friend of yours that used to say, how are you doing? To this lady, and what would she say to you?
Well, you need to imagine the lady. She worked also at this very radical university I was at, but she was prone to wear outrageous hats and feather boas. And you would say to her, Priscilla, how are you doing today? And she said, darling, if it got any better, I think I'd go pop. It just changes the whole temperature of the conversation.
Isn't it great? Yeah. The life is good, and it's a great attitude to have. You are one of the many people who have converted to the Catholic Church from the Church of England, but you're probably one of the most high-profile people in the last number of years here in the United Kingdom because of your position within the Anglican Church as one of the chaplains for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. I heard you say in an interview once, Gavin, that it wasn't so much you leaving the Anglican Church, but the Anglican Church left to you. What did you mean by that?
Well, I was ordained in 1980. And I became a practicing Anglican in 1975 when I was a law student and had an evangelical conversion. And in those days, the Anglican Church was still considered itself to be, improperly as it turned out, a branch of the Catholic faith that had kind of tidied itself up in this country. And so it acted derivatively a little bit. It was a sort of an imitation act, but it tried to be a good one. And during the period of my being part of it, it gave that up completely and adopted a secular culture. And so it effectively destroyed the Anglican Church's ambition to be part of the historic Christian mind and ecclesiology.
It's an interesting argument that I see even in parts of the Catholic Church too. Should the world change for the gospel or the gospel change for the world? If we don't change and adapt, we'll die out. We need to, be innovative and change with the times. And where do you draw the line?
Oh, it's very difficult. I mean, it's easier now looking back. I mean, now I could go back to myself in 2000 year 2000 or 1980 and say, but because we've seen the way in which the thing plays out. But at the time, in the middle of the 20th century. The same thing applies to Vatican II to some extent. In a diluted form, the Catholic Church has had to deal with some similar issues, and it's not done much better, though it hasn't made any fatal mistakes as the Anglican Church did. Because we didn't have a very clearly marked out theology of sexuality. Our anthropology was continually becoming
ever changing.
Yeah, well, it was, yes, but it was more and more narcissistic. It's all about. I saw a priest the other day say every church has an altar or a stage, and it's either a sacrifice or it's a show. It's either the mass or it's entertainment, and so it was very difficult to know what the answers to these questions were, because they were posed in ways that particularly Anglicanism didn't have a theological answer to. Now, in fact, the Catholic Church does have profound theological answers to all these questions, because it's been asking them for a very long time. But the difficulty with being an Anglican was it's essentially a political idea. It was always a political idea from the very beginning. It was a political idea that developed a certain theological language, but ultimately the theological language was driven by the politics. And so when feminism came along, it essentially said, if men can do this, why can't women? And there's no political answer to that. The answer is, well, you better let them. There is indeed a theological answer, but the Anglican Church didn't do theology. It still doesn't do theology. In all the years when I heard it debated in the General Synod, I was a member of its synodal process for 20 years, I never heard a theological argument, only ever a political one. So in that sense, its foundations were very shaky.
And when the Anglican Church makes these seismic changes in how it operates, its structures, its processes, and so on and so forth, in their defense, they say this is done in consultation with its members through prayerfulness, listening to the voice of Jesus. Is that what they would say?
Yes, but the reason why this can't be trusted or respected is because, so let's say we did this in the Catholic Church. The first question is, are the people you're consulting well catechized? Because there are lots of different kind of Catholics. Who are the kind of Catholics we'd want to consult for this kind of thing? Well, catechized ones. If you are well catechized, you're welcome to your opinion. There is no catechism in Anglicanism. And so you've no idea whether you're talking to somebody who's nearly a saint or who's simply a member of the Labour Party. But each of them will say, well, I prayed about this and here's my answer. And of course, if they play the spiritual card, who is to say, no, I think you're shallow and not very well formed? You can't say that to somebody. And so you can't call the bluff ever. But everyone always says, well, I prayed about this and, I think God wants, which is if you have a spiritual confessor in the Catholic tradition, you're very careful when you not to use language like that. In monasteries, for example, if a monk has a special private revelation from God, his spiritual director will usually say, well, sit on it for 10 years and then let's look at it and see how it's played out a bit. In case it's
and then at the end of the 10 years, he says, you know what, give it another 10 years and think about it.
Not very clear yet, yes.
Well, Gavin, why do you think, or how do you think the church has been so successful? It is the institutional church here in the United Kingdom, of course. If, in your view, it does have such a shaky and unstable foundation, why does it work so well for so many people?
I think because two things. One is everyone has a hunger for God. And if you have a reasonably, they took our churches, it looked quite good. They dressed up like us. They borrowed the clothes and they did a good act. So because you have people born all the time hungry for God, the two things came together. But equally, God is very generous. And every so often, he set a fire burning in people's hearts. He can do that with anybody, whoever they are. And there were two wonderful episodes of that, particularly the Wesleys and Newman and the Catholic movement. The interesting thing is that although both were very powerful and entirely authentic, the Anglican Church proved incapable of actually containing them. And so the evangelical fire in Wesley burst out. They locked the doors on them. They started the Methodist denomination. And the Oxford movement became, in the end, a schismatic movement that fell to bits because it came down ultimately to either Pusey or Newman. Pusey saying, we can go on pretending it's okay, and Newman saying, no, we can't. We either have to be Catholics or stop the pretense, which remains the case for the nostalgically romantic Anglicans.
It's amazing when you look back at your journey, to use that word that everyone uses today. You were an atheist for a while when you were studying for the bar, was it? Your father had been an atheist and then he had become a Christian, and your mother even at one stage was into mediums. There was a pretty diverse
You've done
mix
your
there.
homework.
Yeah.
Yes, well, we're actually sitting next to Canterbury Cathedral where I was at school, and my atheist period was every alternate year here. So I was very impressed by this building, and I also have developed a close relationship with St. Thomas of Becket. I used to go and sit and talk to him about authority and integrity where he was slain. But
you weren't impressed by the clergy, though, at
no,
the time.
do you know, I really wasn't at all impressed by the clergy. But in order to because I didn't know, I thought, well, let's do 1 year as a Christian and the next year as an atheist. So in the 4 years here, I think I did 3 as a Christian and 2 as an atheist. And in the end came to a kind of vague, adolescent, shallow sense that, well, when I was an atheist, I got to keep more of my own stuff. I didn't have to share my bootleg sherry and my chocolate biscuits.
Your liquor was yours.
My liquor was
Because an
mine.
atheist doesn't have to share.
No, absolutely, an atheist does not have to share, but a Christian does have to share. I'm afraid it didn't get much more sophisticated than that. But I always had a very profound hunger for God. I just wake up in the morning and think, what the heck am I doing here? The sort of the existential crisis bites hard in me. I think I'm a permanent adolescent. I always have been.
You felt that struggle, that sense of wanting God, but also wanting to live your life and rock and roll.
Yes, that's
I know
right.
I heard you say before that you went to Canada in search of drugs and sex.
Yes, I did. I didn't find either.
Okay, but you wanted to live that life. And
Well,
live
I was a late teenager. Well,
Yeah.
I was curious, of course. And these were the sort of the late 60s and the 70s. And essentially, we were being told by innuendo and delicately to begin with, but increasingly, as they turned the volume up, that hedonism was the way both to be therapeutically well-rounded and to be satisfied. I knew it wasn't, but I think I told myself at the time, I'd like a bit of experience to find out. So having found out, I can reject it. But actually, that is what happened. I always had a very clear sense that ultimately, holiness meant dealing with the human appetites. I knew that my appetites were not going to lead me to a good place.
Lord, make me chaste, just not
Just
yet.
not yet, yes.
Yeah.
And yet, the longer you're not made chaste, the more the indigestion grows.
Now, your parents, your dad being a barrister,
Yes.
your mum and dad wanted you to continue in the legal field because it was in the
Yes.
family.
Yes, very much
and
so.
you put all the effort and time and money into it. When did you think, actually, I'm going to become a clergyman?
It was very difficult. I wanted to be a lawyer. A bit of me still does. 2 of my children have done law, so I live vicariously through them. I was so impressed with Jesus that I was quite sure that I wanted to work for him and with him in anything I did.
So you felt a vocation?
In a very strange way. It just wouldn't leave me alone. It was like a constant niggle rather than a Damascus experience. My mother said, this Christianity stuff, she said, can you just not keep it as a hobby? Like most sensible people. I said,
They thought you were throwing your life away.
Yeah.
And what
yeah.
could be in you're smart, you're intelligent, use your brains for this, why become...
Well, I was a bit mediocre, but I still might have made it as a lawyer all the same.
Are they still alive today, your parents? Are they passed?
They're dead. Yeah.
Did they live long enough to see you join the royal ecclesiastical household?
They didn't. Although my father said, as it happened, my father and Prince Philip were shipmates in the Second World War. Philip was a first lieutenant, my father was a second lieutenant on the same North Sea convoys. And there were some stories that happened. And my father said, if you ever see my shipmate Philip for any reason, if they make you a bishop or something, or whatever, will you remind him from me of X, Y, and Z? So I said, sure, Dad, not thinking it would happen.
Yeah.
Then one day I was in Buckingham Palace standing next to Prince Philip and thinking, now, do I owe my father this, or do I behave like a grown-up and stay stum?
That's why when you converted to the Catholic Church, it was such a big story here, because to be a chaplain for Queen Elizabeth, I know that at any given time there are 36
Yes.
in the United
Yes,
Kingdom,
that's right.
but still it is a great honour, great prestige. Did you have much dealing with her when you were the chaplain? How does that work practically?
Honestly, it sounds much more of an honour than it really is. It's like, I don't mean to demean it, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but the part of the problem with the Church of England is, and as actually with the whole establishment, that it puts up a good show, but sometimes it's only skin deep. And the thing is, the chaplains don't do anything. So I mean, I'll answer your question about whether one could make something better from that, but it's a Catholic idea. The reason you had 36 chaplains is because when the king went on his travels, or the queen, you had to have chaplains to say mass. You had to have a lot of chaplains. See, these are mass chaplains. It's a Catholic idea. When the Protestant Reformation came, they said, well, what do we do with these 36 priests? They're not going to celebrate mass anymore. So they made a rota and said, well, they can preach sermons one after the other in St. James's Chapel, which is a bit silly, really. But then, so then you wore a scarlet cassock and you got invited to things. You get to go to garden parties at Buckingham Palace. You get to go to receptions at Windsor, and you just stand around and you make polite conversation. And if you know people, that's very helpful. However, inevitably, as you meet people, I remember once meeting Sophie Wessex and mistaking her for a cocktail waitress. So it was very funny, and we became not good friends, but I mean, as we worked through the misunderstanding.
Yes, funny looking back.
Well, I said, look, I'm very sorry, but you look awfully familiar. Have we met? And then, she's seeing a great opportunity to make fun of me.
Yes.
Said, well, who do you think I am? And then, 20 guesses. But there are moments when you do meet people, and if they like you, they'll talk to you and test you out. But these are kind of serendipities that happen by God's grace. They're not automatic. And in fact, one of the things people don't understand is that the Queen, if the Queen takes advice, it's likely to be. I think the person who had most effect on her was Billy Graham, because there's this film footage of them meeting. Something happened to her after that. She became much more articulate in her faith. But I don't think she'd be likely to consult one of her chaplains, because that just wasn't what they were there for. It
was more ceremonial.
Yeah, yes, it's the flummery of the occasion. It's the decoration on the cake. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying that it sounds very pompous.
It's not a spiritual advisory role.
And it could become it by accident, but it's not given.
Yeah. And beautiful, because we know that Queen Elizabeth was a very prayerful person, a great openness to faith. And I've seen that wonderful footage of her even going to the Vatican as a princess.
Yes.
Before she became the Queen, and then meeting St. Pope John Paul II when Pope Benedict XVI then came. They met in Scotland. Some beautiful moments there, even with Pope Francis as well. Pope Francis saying, pray for me, and she said, oh, don't worry, I will.
Yes.
And
she did.
It was a great honour, though. Did you get to meet her on a few occasions? Or?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but the protocol is you can't ask questions.
Yeah.
She has to lead the questions. And then, she has a routine. So where have you come from? How far have you come today?
Yes.
Or, the 3 or 4, which allow you to have a conversation that, first of all, puts the spotlight on you and not on her. And secondly, leaves her in control of the question. So it didn't quite apply to Prince Philip. I remember saying to him, he was a bit late for reception once, and he made a beeline for me because he knew me by this time. And I said to him, so where have you just come from, sir? Because he was a bit late. Through that bloody door, of course. No, before that. In fact, he'd just come from opening a sewage farm in near Eton in Slough. So I said, well, that must have been a really tricky diary clash. Your diary secretary says, well, you've got a clash. It's the Royal Chaplains at 5. And you're opening the sewage farm, which you're going to give preference to.
We're not going to make a connection there. But then you found yourself in a difficult position, because you're not afraid to speak your mind and to talk about views and controversial topics. And because you were seeing this change in the Anglican Church, I know you would go on TV or in the media and say things like, the Anglican Church is giving way to the pressures to conform to secular morals. And because when that would be in the paper, it would say, by Gavin, ashenden, chaplain to the Queen. So then whatever you would say would be, Queen Elizabeth would be associated to it. And something had to give there. Yes. Is that right?
Well, I decided that I owed it to Jesus to make something of it, but it needed to be done carefully. The more carefully I did it, the longer I could get away with it. I got away with it for 10 years, but inevitably I'd be asked questions. I wasn't in charge of the questions the press asked. And because I was an academic and I taught psychology and also a postgraduate course on metaphysics and monotheism, on Islam, I would be asked questions about Islam, and there are scarcely any questions you can be asked about Islam that don't have problematic answers.
Yeah.
So and I wasn't in charge of the questions, but I tried to give honest answers, and inevitably this was going to cause trouble. And one day I got a phone call from the Lord Chamberlain, and what people don't know is that for all that we have a monarchy, the monarchy don't really have very much power in terms of the way the royal household works. It's all run by the Lord Chamberlain. He has all power. And so he phoned me up late one night and said, Dr. Ashenden, we have a problem. I said, well, it's near bedtime. On a scale of 1 to 10, how serious?
How serious is this?
He said, oh, about 9. I said, oh, okay, well, let's not fool around then. What is it? And then, essentially, he put it in a wonderful way. He said, the general public are under the impression that when you speak on behalf of the Queen. And the difficulty I have is that you might be. And the other problem is the general public are under the impression that the Queen is influenced by your views. And the reason that's a problem is she might be. What can you help me with? I said, well, clearly I have to resign.
So read between the lines, you either shut up or you resign.
Yes,
you get out.
I said, I'll sleep on it. And then I know perfectly well that, this was the moment I've been expecting. So really I do have the Queen to thank for giving me a public profile, which has allowed me to continue commenting on public affairs for as long as people want an answer from me.
And we're here now on the Global Catholic Television Network, EWTN.
We are.
I flew in from Rome for this interview. We're in front of Canterbury Cathedral.
The most prestigious band I've ever spoken to.
Yeah. Was it difficult for you, Gavin, to take that leap of faith and become a Catholic, to believe in the Eucharist, to believe in the role of Mary, to believe in everything that you had to now put your faith and belief in?
So there were some things that were difficult and others that weren't. Once I discovered the Eucharistic miracles, I was very impatient for people to know that the Mass was real. Because in a sense, for the whole of my theological life, we had been arguing about this, both historically and personally. What happens in the Mass, what happens in the Anglican communion service, and there weren't any definitive answers. And suddenly science had produced an answer saying the Catholics were always right. Aquinas was always right. It is real, it's a miracle. And I then wanted the Catholic Church to say, look at what Jesus does for people. And then when I discovered Our Lady and how important she was, particularly in the struggle with evil, and also that's just the amazing gift that she gives the Church time and time and time and time and time again with her apparitions, some of which are authenticated and others aren't, but it doesn't matter. It just goes on happening. It's wonderful. So I became increasingly delighted to be associated with Catholicism. That wasn't at all difficult. And then you've got to remember there's a kind of an Anglican myth that we're kind of honorary Catholics. So we get the benefits without paying any price.
Yes.
So you can live with that for a bit, but what was difficult was...
You said before you were living the substitute, and why live the substitute when you can have the full thing?
Well, the answer is because you have to pay a price.
Yeah.
And so the price you pay on becoming a Catholic is, well, you have to repudiate your old life, because the thing is, the Pope says Anglican orders are not valid. So it means whatever you've been doing, it was not what you said it was.
But was that difficult for you? Because presumably you would have made many friends in the Anglican Church, still in your family.
Yeah.
And you were now embarking on a new stage of life where you have to say to them, look, I believe that I'm right, and actually you're all wrong.
Yes, it was. So it was both. Again, it was easy and difficult at the same time. One of the things that happened over the previous 10 years was I'd become increasingly Catholic, ethically, philosophically, spiritually, and my Anglican friends had gone in a totally so there was this gap widening between us all the time. And I would say, look, you're going in the wrong direction. And as I became more Catholic, more educated, I think, in a sort of the theological Catholic mindset, I became more articulate, and therefore I said, but this, what you're doing is you're actually selling out. You're changing the nature of faith itself. And what's more, these are the things that lie down the road. You mustn't go in that direction.
You're talking like an ideological divide.
Yes.
More progressive, more left-leaning.
Absolutely.
And you were going back more traditional, more conservative.
Yes, that's right. And so in a sense, it became almost a relief to say, I believe these things because the church believes them. These are not my beliefs. I don't have to persuade you. This isn't me being clever or deep or spiritual or opinionated. This is the belief of Christ's church. It's a wonderful thing to be able to say that as a Catholic. But you do lose your friends. You lose a whole culture. There are clubs, societies, spiritualities, friendships, places, and you never go there again. So yes, you give up a lot.
Do you ever feel a little sense of betrayal on a human level?
No. I'm thrilled to be a Catholic. I love being a Catholic. I really love it. And nothing I've had to give up outbalances the joy of knowing that I can receive the Mass, knowing the joy, particularly now, that the Pope is the Pope, knowing the joy of a resurgent Catholic Church rediscovering its own roots. No, it's absolutely wonderful. I miss, there are places you can't ever go again, but this happens to everybody. When you can't run you'll never run a 4-minute mile again. When there comes a point when you put your squash racket down, you can't do that. We have to let go of everything as we go through life, and so if one's practicing letting go in order to open your hands to whatever it is God has to give you today, then we should get better at letting go.
The past is the past. What do you think is going to happen to the Anglican Church here in the UK? What's the future?
It will become hollowed out with nothing at the centre, and because they have £6 billion investments and our buildings, they will keep a show going where in the more dramatic places. So they'll do coronations and royal funerals, and they'll keep the cathedrals ticking over, that they don't look after them very well. But the life of the parish churches is very close to being defunct already. I mean, I think the average age in Anglican parishes is over 70, and there's no great renewal in the youth. So demographically, it's simply going to evaporate. And in a way, this is a
And it's bad news all round, isn't it? Because as you said at the beginning, even if it did fulfill some sort of spiritual fulfillment role for people, especially young people who are looking for it in the world so much today, if they're not even going there and they're not getting it from anywhere else.
I think I have to say it's bad news because the less Christianity there is a bad thing. I think it's a complicated situation. In one sense, it's bad because you want churches to be open, people to be praying and saying the office, even if they do it suboptimally. But yet at the same time, so I had an Anglican bishop friend who, after a very awful synodal vote, when the Liberals were really very cruel and inhuman, he walked out in great despair. We had our arms around each other, I think, at one moment. He said, "Gavin, this is the end of a 500-year-old ecumenical experiment." As far as he was concerned, Anglicanism died at that point. And I was shocked. I said, that can't be right. But he was right. It has died. Protestantism and the reasons for Protestantism have outlived their original purpose by some time. They are non-renewable because they're a reaction. And the thing they're reacting to has moved. It's like someone looking to shoot at a target, but there is no target anymore. So, what is the justification for your shooting exercise when there's no target? Because the Catholic Church is no longer in the place it was in the 16th century, if it was ever there, and it probably wasn't. What is the justification for it, apart from being the conscience of the state? But the state doesn't want a conscience anymore. It certainly doesn't want a Christian conscience. So the state has repudiated its own state church. I don't see it has a role anymore. So at this point, I say, well, I don't mean to be rude, but it's now time to bring the Catholic Church back.
And we see somewhat of a revival, a quiet renewal. Record baptisms in France, more people attending church here over Easter in the United Kingdom, and of course then the global south in Africa and Asia, huge numbers becoming Catholics, going into seminary. So there is hope there.
Oh, but there's immense hope, because in what Protestants don't understand is that in every single century the Lord has renewed the Catholic Church. Every century has its saints. Every century has its periods of renewal. Our Lady is part of that. The Catholic Church has never not been renewed. So we are being renewed. It's happens more powerfully where the Mass and Our Lady are taken seriously, which is why we're finding that the traditional resources are the ones where people find the access works better. So yes, I mean, it's very exciting. But the only thing we have to remind people is it's a great and powerful thing to be a Catholic, but do it properly.
And you know what, Gavin, perfect timing, because it's a real English summer. Even though we're in July, the rain has started and I can see it starting to drip down on you again.
Well, it's kept off for long enough for us to have a conversation, so
Isn't it wonderful? Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. And if we were doing any better, we would go pop. So, Gavin, thank you so much.
Thank you. Blessed be God forever. Thank you for your kindness.
That was a good rehearsal. We'll record that now when you're ready.
Excellent.